Hello and welcome to Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, the podcast dedicated to reviewing each and every one of the so-called Walt Disney animated classic feature films in chronological order, putting aside our own nostalgia and their influence and trying to review them on their own merits as films to decide whether we think they're worthy of making our own refined list of a Waly Gisnep animated classic. My name is Ben and joining me as always is my good friend Liam. Liam, oh boy, which film are we looking at this week?
The pressure is very much on this time because we are looking at what is arguably Disney's most successful film of the revival. When it was released, it became the most financially successful animated film up to that point. I think even now it's only really been surpassed, I think, by the Lion King remake. There's probably a couple of others as well, and also the Lion King remake, I don't count that as an animated. Well, even if it is animated, it's not original, so who cares? And I think its sequel might have done better. Anyway, the point is, at the time, the most financially successful animated film, one that has had a ridiculous impact on popular culture. Of course, we are talking about the mega hit that is 2013's Frozen. Now, I distinctly remember this being a film that I was very excited to follow in the run-up, and made sure I watched it pretty much on the first day at the cinemas. What about yourself?
So after coming back to Disney with Bolt and being very much enamoured by Tangled, which really felt like a modern turning point for Disney where they said, we've got the formula back, we've got a new way of doing things that's innovative but also classical. I was very excited to see what more they were going to do. Wreck-It Ralph felt like an interesting experiment, but it also didn't really hit home for that. Then I saw the trailers for Frozen and I thought it looked awful, because they very much focused on the wacky comedy elements, and it looked like that's all it was going to be. It looked like it was going to be Ice Age, basically, but with humans. So I went in with very low expectations.
I can definitely see that. I distinctly remember one trailer which was just essentially a shot of Olaf and Sven, where Sven's trying to eat the carrot, and they end up putting it in the film in some way, but it was very much a distinct thing of like, hey, this is what we're going for, and it's like a kind of visual tech demo of what the film will be. And I saw that and thought, okay. But then at, I think, is it D3? There's like a Disney Expo, and I want to call it D3, and I'm not sure if that's just because I'm getting confused with E3. But at what I'm going to call D3, they basically released out of context the introduction of Let It Go. And again, I didn't really understand what was going on with the song, like where it was in the film, but I heard it and I was like, this is going to be huge.
So as always, we're going to talk a little bit about the context in which this film was made. We're going to go through the plot of Frozen, we're going to decide who is the sexiest character in Frozen, and then finally we're going to decide whether we think this film is worthy of being added to the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. So perhaps more than any other Disney film, certainly recently, the production history of this film is fairly well documented and well known. But basically this is a film that, like a lot of Disney films, really bounced around the studio for a long time, and there were various script treatments done, all based around the Hans Christian Andersen story of the Snow Queen. And so the story goes that the character of Elsa was very much going to be a villain, or maybe a tragic villain, and then they wrote Let It Go, and they went, we can do something very different with this film.
Yeah, you can find like early animatics from when Elsa was a much more villainous character. I will say, I love Idina Menzel. I think she's got one of the best voices you can find. I understand why they cast her as a villain, and I do maybe think they should have recast her after they made that change.
I don't know who you're talking about, Liam. I thought Elsa was voiced by Adele Dazeem. That's what John Travolta introduced Idina Menzel as at the Oscars, by the way.
Do you mean John Travolta? Yeah, so the score and songs of this film were all written by songwriting duo Robert and Kristen Anderson Lopez, returning from their work on the modestly budgeted Winnie the Pooh. And yeah, the story goes they were really struggling to come up with the villain song for the character of Elsa. They just weren't relating to her as a villain, so they just stepped back and said, well, what does it feel like to be this character? And they ended up writing Let It Go. and it just completely changed the film to the point where they scrapped basically everything else they'd done. So it ended up being the first song that made it into the film that they wrote.
Probably a good move, looking back, given how ubiquitous Let It Go is and how successful this franchise is.
I still can't believe just how appealing the songs in this film are to toddlers. I have no idea what it is about Robert and Kristen Anderson Lopez's songwriting, but I said it in Winnie the Pooh. They just seem to be able to write musical crack for toddlers, and it's bizarre. There's a really nice story that Idina Menzel shares where her daughter, I think, was at daycare and the other girls were talking to her and they said, "What does your mummy do?" Which is a weird conversation to have at daycare, but I'm imagining she's kind of, adapting what they said. And her daughter turned around and goes, "My mummy sings the songs from Frozen." And all the girls turned around and went, "Our mummies do that."
So before we spend the whole podcast talking about Let It Go, let's talk about the plot of Frozen. So we open with a fairly atmospheric opening, and right off the bat, I think the musical direction they've taken with Frozen broadly is absolutely the right direction. And I'm not talking about necessarily the songs, although we will get to those, but the broader score and underlying music, which is clearly very Nordically influenced and very atmospheric. I really like the opening sort of chant over the opening credits. I find it really evocative.
This chant got a lot of bad faith criticism, I feel, where people said it didn't fit with the rest of the film and it felt like it was out of a different franchise, which I really don't get. So much so that they ended up shoehorning it into the sequel as an explanation, which I will get to when we talk about the sequel. But I really love the chanting. Obviously, the colour palette of a film can be very cool, but immediately, I feel the sound design is incredibly cool as well, and it instantly puts me in a kind of cold but comfy and relaxed space. It's very Christmassy. I think you said this about the songs in Winnie the Pooh, that Robert and Kristen Anderson Lopez are really good at evoking a kind of Christmassy feel, and I really feel that straight away. I think, as you say, it's the Nordic influence that they managed to nail really well.
As we mentioned, it is based on The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen, and it's only very recently that it was pointed out to me that there is a reference to that because the characters are called Hans, Kristoff, Anna, Sven, which is way cleverer than me.
I've never noticed that. I only ever realised Hans, and I feel like an idiot now. The famed Danish author Hans Christian Andersen Elsa.
So we get this opening number, and it's some guys digging up ice and singing about how ice is powerful, but also it's dangerous. Now, I don't really get how ice is a key part of this economy, but I'm okay with it because visually it's great. And I suppose this sets up that, obviously thematically, we've got a lot of stuff about ice and snow as visual motifs, but my god, the animation on the ice and snow in this film is superb.
This is very much one of those kind of Pixar landmark films where you make a film to celebrate what you are capable of. And the snow, the ice, everything about the weather and the cold is so well done here. Like the snow, I've seen some behind the scenes stuff where they have physics engines built into it to help with the animation, to give the illusion of powdered snow so when the 3D models are walking through the snow, it's generating that, and it's just so impressive. And clearly they were like, yep, we can do this now, let's do the Snow Queen.
Again, we've referenced this before, but we've come such a long way from Dinosaur, let's say, which is only 13 years ago, but you look at the character models in that and they just flatly hover across the sand or the mud and they barely interact with it. And now you've got snow that basically looks photorealistic. Obviously the characters don't because of their dimensions and colouring, etc., but the environments themselves, they're good, is what I'm trying to say.
I really like this opening number, as well as sort of setting the tone and the palette of the film. We've got this repeated line about beware the frozen heart, where they're really trying to drill that into our schools. And alongside this, we're getting our introduction to the most adorable little boy in the form of Kristoff.
So adorable that no adults want to take care of him, apparently.
Yeah, why is he there? And why are none of these men taking any responsibility for him? They've just let some small boy follow them to somewhere that they themselves are claiming is incredibly dangerous.
It's never really addressed. And I don't think it's addressed in the sequel either, that Kristoff is just this poor little orphan boy whose only friend is a tiny cutesy reindeer, and some other characters we'll get to, but I've got a lot to say about them, so I don't want to derail it too early.
And so as the song fades, we scan up to the Aurora Borealis, and then scan back down, and we've now cut to the bedroom of young Anna and Elsa. They have a bit of back and forth, and then run downstairs to ruin the ballroom, which water damage on that wood is going to be a big problem, and I wonder how many times Elsa has actually done this.
I like to think it's never addressed, but one of the servants has the very specific power of restoring the quality of wood and removing damp.
Do the servants know?
Look, we've not got very far into this film yet. Let's just... Because I've also got a lot of questions about this. But let's talk about Anna and Elsa first. So we've got these two very cutesy young children who clearly have this bond over playing together and using Elsa's ice powers. And Elsa makes snowmen and makes little sculptures, and they have a great play together. Anna pushes it a bit too far, and because of that, Elsa hits her in the head with some ice magic. And...
Whoa. She accidentally hits her in the head.
Okay, she accidentally hits her in the head with some ice magic, and the king and queen immediately go, right, we need to go see some rocks.
So yeah, they all run out to the forest, ask some rocks who are actually trolls if they can help. There's a quick line about, it's a good job it was her head. The head can be convinced, the heart not so much. And I still think, like, she still took a bolt of ice to the inside of her head.
I mean, a lot of what the trolls say, I'm just going to say is bullshit. So they say that they have to kind of get rid of all knowledge of magic for Anna, presumably because if she remembers it, it will cause some damage or something. Later on in the film, when Anna encounters magic, there's literally no ill effect, so the trolls are just making it up as they go. But also we established that if you get hit in the heart, only an act of true love can recover it. So they're basically saying Anna's parents don't love her, which, to be fair, given how they act later in this film, is probably true.
So my interpretation of removing the memories was because she's very young and they won't be able to reason with her and say, look, you need to be careful with your sister's magical powers. You'll both get hurt. So instead of, having that mature conversation, they're like, nope, we'll just make her forget that her sister has powers and at no point ever decide to, have that conversation with her. Because I can understand it. She's very, very young. I think she's supposed to be like 6 or 5 in the opening. And, if your sibling has got cool ice magic, nothing your parents say is going to stop you being like, show me the cool ice magic. But, when they hit like 11 or 12, you can have the conversation. Be like, look, your sister's got cool ice magic. It's really dangerous. Don't push her.
Look, Liam, I think you're misunderstanding the King Queen's MO, because what they actually do is the trolls say Elsa needs to learn to control her magic, and they interpret that as she needs to suppress all feeling and be completely isolated from the outside world, and also for no reason so does Anna.
Let's not put this all on the parents. The trolls also give Elsa a massive fright by showing her a vision of her future and say, look, your powers are beautiful, but also terrifying. Be careful and be terrified. Be
terrified, but also don't be scared, because it's fear that makes this happen, but also they're terrifying.
These are our love experts.
So we can basically establish that the parents are terrible, the trolls are terrible. They decide to isolate Elsa and Anna from everything indefinitely for no good reason. They teach Elsa that she has to conceal, not feel, she has to wear gloves, and just basically pretend her powers don't exist, which isn't what the trolls said at all, but fine.
Look, Ben, when you're the king of a country, you don't need to listen to some stupid trolls.
I'll bear that in mind. Because that may well come to be relevant in my life, if things pan out. So we then get the song, Do You Want to Build a Snowman? And I have so much to say about this song. So this is such a good demonstration of establishing relationships, establishing a passage of time. It does a lot of exposition. And I'm going to say, even though I love Tangled, this is way better than a narration section at the start of the film. You're a Disney musical, do it through a song, damn it. The thrust of the song is Anna repeatedly asking through the locked door to Elsa's room if Elsa wants to build a snowman, and talking about how lonely she is, and Elsa either rejecting her or not replying, and we get sort of 3 different phases throughout the years of these 2 characters.
It's a bit early, but this is my favourite song in the whole film. I think it's wonderfully done. I think all of the vocal performances are incredible, and to get such young people singing and conveying the emotions so well, like when the youngest Anna is disappointed and rejected, I can feel that heartbreak. It's so good. And yeah, we've got these 3 phases. We've got the youngest Anna, who is only just first experiencing this rejection. We've got slightly older one who is used to it but is expressing frustration at that loneliness. And then we have this small interlude where the world's worst parents go off and get themselves killed, which is not why they're the world's worst parents, but you know,
it takes the edge off them dying, knowing that they're terrible parents.
And then finally, one last verse with the now adult Anna, voiced by Kristen Bell, singing just one last time to her sister through the door, and they're both sitting on either side of the door crying, sort of mourning the loss of their parents. And what a great way to show that even in like their most vulnerable moment, they still aren't together. Again, entirely because of their abusive parents.
I think this final verse is one of the most heartbreaking things in all of Disney, and I think it's superb. The vocal performance gets me every time. I've heard this song a lot, but every single time it gets me. And particularly the line, "Please, I know you're in there. People have been asking where you've been," for me sets up one of the reasons Elsa's so popular as a character and why this film's so strong. Or the strongest parts of this film, certainly, because I think you can map so much onto that. So we'll talk about readings of what the ice magic means a little bit later, but for me, I've been the person on both sides of that door. The person who is blocking people out, and the person who's desperate to get in, someone will not let them. And whether you read that as mental illness or sexuality or whatever you read that as, there's something so human and universal about it. And they managed to get all that in just a simple verse with a simple visual and a great performance.
Did you also have the ice powers?
Not as yet, but hope springs eternal.
I love that shot of Elsa as well, where she's curled up against the door crying and the room is just freezing around her. Like, what a great way to immediately show... In fact, they show us a little bit in the ballroom that her powers are so strongly connected to her emotions, and they don't have to tell us that at any point. Obviously, the trolls are like, oh, fear will make it worse, yada, yada, yada. Also, don't listen to your parents, they're not good. But the key thing, i.e. the connection between her emotions and her powers, is pretty much all visual.
It's superb. I feel I could talk about it all day, and also I feel like it speaks for itself. I absolutely love this sequence.
Anyway, hard cut to nice, cheery Arendelle. The gates are opening, and yay, it's Coronation Day. Because you can't have the death of a monarch without the coronation of a new one.
Unless the revolution succeeds and there's no more monarchs, but that's not happened this instance. We didn't really touch on it, but the death of the parents is handled almost exclusively visually. We see the ship sail off into a storm, we see a black curtain pulled over their portrait, and then we see the sort of memorial stones. Again, just really nice visual storytelling. After all the exposition dumps from Sonic et al. In Wreck-It Ralph, it's nice.
Yeah, this is a very efficient opening to a film, but because it's done so well, I don't mind it so much. Like, even the weird magical doctor's appointment with the trolls, where they just completely throw out the door. Was she born with it or was she cursed? She was born with it. Let's move on. The powers, that is, not the ice in Anna's head.
Not the bad parents.
Not the
Okay.
Oh no, she was born with the bad parents, yeah.
I'd actually say it's Coronation Day, and we almost immediately jump into another musical number with For the First Time in Forever, which is, I guess it's Anna's I Want song, really, or the closest we get to it in this film.
Yeah, I would say one thing that really stands out for the musical numbers in this film is they don't necessarily fit that Renaissance mould of flagpole songs that you base your story around, and each one has a purpose and a meaning, which is weird because the writers are coming from that Broadway school of songwriting, and yet what they've done is very, very unique. Like, it's clearly Anna's I Want song, but it's much more of an insight to her loneliness than her desires, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's very much a reflection of I'm excited about all these things rather than this is the one thing I want that I can't have. Because I suppose in some ways that's what Do You Want to Build a Snowman is that she wants to be with Elsa and she can't be. Again, this song is a lot of fun. I think we get a really good snapshot of Anna as a character, and I think it does a good job of making her really likeable as well. I think this has been talked about a lot, but Frozen does a really good job of doing everything it wants to with princesses and more, because they go, hey, what if we had 2 princesses? Because people love Disney princesses.
We've touched on it, but I think that Kristen Bell's performance is so good. I don't think we've had as strong an acting performance during songs since Jodie Benson with Ariel, where it's a lot more reserved and it's not about the singing, though don't get me wrong, she's got a fantastic singing voice, but it's more about the performance of the character. And I think that's really important in musicals, that you don't just immediately turn into, hey, this is a pop song that I am singing and it will sound like a pop song. You are still acting. And I really feel Anna's excitement throughout this whole number, and it's incredibly endearing.
You've pinpointed something that I've never consciously acknowledged, but I think that is absolutely why this sequence works. Kristen Bell is superb in this role, and in some ways a bit of a revelation. Not that I thought she wasn't talented before, but I would not have pinned her for this role, but she smashes it out of the park. A couple of other things I like in this section: we get a really nice pseudo-villain introduction, which is sort of a fake-out for later. We get the Duke of Wesselton, who is just clearly a bad dude. He's obsessed with trade, and he's clearly just your generic Disney villain, voiced by Alan Tudyk, getting to play a human being for once.
I mean, he played a human... Oh no, he played a weird zombie video game character, didn't he, in the last one?
He's not been downgraded to stupid chicken yet, but... And we also get a little cameo of Flynn Rider and Rapunzel, who are 2 of the guests for the coronation, which I think works exceptionally well, because I find it very believable that Arendelle is in the same world / universe as Tangled. You know, we've come a long way from a goofy mermaid or a dog having a picture of Ratigan. And one other thing I really love about this is we get some overlapped singing between Anna and Elsa, which we do revisit later, but I'm just going to say it. I absolutely love it. I described it as Les Mising, where you've got the 2 leads sort of singing over the top of each other and some overlap, and Anna's is all about the excitement of the gates opening, Elsa's is all about the anxiety of it, Anna's all about wanting to show her feelings, Elsa's all about wanting to conceal them. We get this glorious parallel between these 2 characters.
I think I like it more this time than when they do it later, because Les Mis is a really good example, because my reaction to it was this feels very sung through, where they don't necessarily need to be singing to each other. This is, again, I'm referring to the later one, and we'll cover it when we get to it. But it felt very Broadway and very sung through, where, you know, like Les Mis, there is no spoken dialogue, so everything has to be sang. But later, I feel, maybe they could be talking to each other, but this parallel, as you say, excitement versus anxiety, so perfect. And this whole sequence ends in, frankly, a really good meet cute, where Anna gets hit by a horse, which I suppose is the equivalent of, you know, getting hit by a car. It's still as, you know, painful.
The horse isn't the meet cute character, by the way.
Is it not?
I've misunderstood this film massively.
I want my true love's kiss from Hans's horse. Because yes, we have the introduction of Hans, voiced by one of my favourite actors, Santino Fontana, who you may know as Greg from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and it's so hard for me to separate the voice from that character. And so we've got a bit of a awkward back and forth between the 2, where this is clearly our meet cute for our romantic leads. One thing I will say, this film very much is a revival film in that it is aware of the tropes and tries to poke fun at them. One way I feel that happens in this film that didn't necessarily happen in Tangled, and I don't really like as much, is that I feel characters have to react to everything that is said. So like a moment will happen, and instead of just leaving it, a character will respond to it. We had one earlier, like the Duke of Wesselton has this moment where he's basically monologuing about how excited he is to crack open Arendelle and help himself to all of its trade goods, and then pauses and goes, wait, did I say that out loud? Which to me is not needed. That's an element of the Disney revival I don't like. And maybe this meet cute goes a bit too far into the awkwardness of like, oops, I'm an awkward princess. Isn't it weird? But I like it because I like these characters.
So I've not touched on this yet, but I have two distinct sets of feelings about this opening act. So there's the first time I watched this and subsequent watches. So the first time I watched this, I wasn't really having a good time at this point because this felt so trope reliant and it felt so generic, and I was like, okay, so these characters are going to be the romantic leads and yada yada. I can see where all the plot beats of this film are going. The second time watching this, I get way more out of it because all this is being set up to kind of go, we're doing all the generic Disney stuff, and then for it to be subverted in the second half of the film, which is a weird experience because I think it absolutely works when they do subvert it, but on your first watch, I was like, this is quite lazy and generic.
Yeah, I think Frozen manages it, but I feel we're so far into the revival now that if another Frozen was to come out, by which I don't mean Frozen 3, I mean, another film that does that, where it sets up the tropes to subvert them, it wouldn't surprise me. And as soon as I see them so obviously setting up these tropes, I'm like, okay, they're going to subvert my expectations again.
So then we go full circle, and the way to subvert your expectations is to not subvert your expectations.
Basically, yeah. And I think it's a fine line that Frozen gets away with because it was basically the first one to subvert them so much. But of course, it is Coronation Day. We have a nice scene where Elsa is actually being coronated, and she's incredibly anxious and terrified because she feels that she's going to reveal herself, her powers, to the audience. There's a really good tense bit where she's taking her gloves off. And obviously no other character is aware of this. I guess they didn't tell the staff.
No, they just left Elsa locked in a room.
Don't go near her room, ever. Even if we die. Leave the food by the door, knock twice, and leave.
We're doing this because we're great parents.
I think they were just looking for an excuse to cut costs in the castle. What was that, Trolls? You want us to fire the au pair? Okay. No, that's not what we said. And the kitchen staff.
Can you modify their memories that we gave them redundancy?
And so after the coronation, we get a scene in the ballroom where both Anna and Elsa are introduced, and we get this lovely moment where the two are reunited for what feels like the first time
in forever.
I had to stop myself from saying it. I realised what I was saying. But yeah, it feels like the first time in forever that these two have even interacted, which is lovely and heartbreaking. And we get this really nice snapshot of them as sisters.
I think it's so good because you see this relationship from both perspectives. So from Anna's, Elsa is being polite, but she's so much more mature, and she's still being cold and distant and professional. Whereas for Elsa, she's desperately trying to show emotion and feeling and warmth to Anna, but she doesn't want to overstretch it and risk revealing herself. So we can both see how each of those characters feels, and also what the other character is seeing and how they're interpreting that.
But don't worry, it's not all lovely. We get an annoying interlude where the Duke of Weselton has to do a dance. I hate it. Just get rid of it. But then there's this lovely moment where Anna returns and she's like, I wish we could have extravagant parties all the time. Why not? We're super wealthy, let's do it. Or something along those lines. And Elsa's like, someone's got to foot the bill. I'm not doing it, I'm the queen now. And she's like, fine, screw you. And then runs off and has a romantic evening with Hans.
The original full title was Your Assets Are Frozen. Yeah, we get this very fun song, Love is an Open Door. It's just a big, fun, silly love song. And again, it's being a bit subversive and very much playing on these characters have literally just met and they're in love and they're so in sync and they're so meant to be together.
One thing I really love about this film, and look, we've all seen Frozen at this point. we'll keep our cards close to the chest, but we all know where this is going. And one thing I love about Frozen is there's this constant sense of duality where things have always got double meanings. And this song perfectly encapsulates that, of what love is an open door means to both of these characters. And it's so good.
I have a lot to say about Hans and the twist villain, but I feel it's not relevant until later. So the party goes on, and
before we move on, one thing I love about this sequence is before they start singing, we just get snapshots of their evening together, and we'll just catch like tidbits of conversation. And one line that really stood out to me this time was just Anna saying, "Your physique helps a lot, I'm sure."
So the party goes on, and Anna and Hans after this decide they're going to get married, and they go to Elsa very excitedly to ask for a blessing, and Elsa says, "No, you can't marry someone you've just met. I don't give you my blessing. I'm not going to allow this." And this kind of escalates, and really it starts spilling out about what they actually think and feel. Anna asking why Elsa's blocking her out, why she won't be close to her, what Anna's done, and things escalate, and Elsa accidentally shoots out some ice spikes, revealing to all the aristocracy that she has these powers.
I'll just say very, very quickly, the whole "you can't marry someone you just met," I don't really think works, because that's very much that revival mentality of kind of poking fun at love at first sight. And what Elsa's really getting at here is, I'm not ready for you to get married and for you to be bringing a stranger, and, you know, I've just been coronated, I can't deal with more change. Which, by the end of the scene, is basically revealed that that's what she feels. But the start of the scene is very much like they have an established relationship, and she's saying, like, "You can't marry someone you just met, what are you thinking?" Whereas really it's like, you're bringing someone, no, we can't do that, would have worked better, in my opinion.
My reading of it was slightly different, because I read this as Elsa desperately trying to be responsible and grown up and a leader, and trying to do what she thinks a leader and basically a maternal figure for Anna would say. And she's obviously not either emotionally or mentally equipped to do it, but she's desperately trying to fill this role she's been forced into.
I get what you're saying, but I think my point is that doesn't make sense for her character, because she hasn't been told she needs to be a maternal figure. We haven't seen her trying to be a maternal figure. It would make more sense if, that's a conversation that Nani and Lilo would have, not two sisters who haven't seen each other basically for 10 years. At the start of the conversation, she comes across as a bit too in control and maternal, whereas I don't feel at that point Elsa would be like that. I think her first reaction should be panic from what we've seen of her.
I definitely see what you're saying. I suppose I see it as this hangover of guilt that Elsa has from all these years, because even though Anna doesn't remember what happened and why they've been isolated, I think Elsa takes on all the blame for that, and she's aware of the impact this has had on Anna. But there's multiple readings to this film, and as always, we're keen to hear what other people read of these relationships and what they mean in the context of these scenes.
I'm going to make one final point on it, which is just that it's the vocal performance and the eyes. Like, I think if her eyes were a bit more worried and the vocal performance had a bit of a shake, instead she's kind of looking down on Anna at this point. Like, her eyes are half sort of closed, she's got her head back, and she's going like, you can't marry someone you've just met. Whereas I think she should be taken aback, compose herself, and then try and say that. I don't know. I feel like it just took me out of the film. I think it's because I'm just really hung up on the revival being self-aware, even when it's not necessarily the most appropriate reaction. But as you say, there's ice everywhere. Everyone's like, oh my god, sorcery. A bit more scared than that. And Elsa just panics and runs, because she's been taught that when things get tough, you have to isolate yourself.
Isolate yourself. Yeah, as you say, things escalate. Elsa keeps trying to move away from people, and in the process, presenting herself as more and more dangerous. She gets called a monster, people look shocked and scared, and eventually she just runs out over the fjord into the wilderness, freezing it as she goes. Anna tries to follow, but Hans stops her, and Anna decides that she's not going to let Elsa go by herself. Anna's determined not to lose her, and this kind of sets up the second act. She leaves Hans in charge of Arendelle, and Anna sets out to find Elsa.
We've done it. We've reached it. We can talk about it in full, because back on the mountain, Elsa finally has her big number. And oh boy, what is there to say about Let It Go that hasn't already been said?
Frozen and The Lion King, I think, are maybe the two films I struggle to talk about the most, because they're probably certainly in our generation in the last 30 years, that the two Disney films have had the biggest impact on popular culture. I don't know if they're the most ingrained in popular culture. Obviously, you know, Snow White, Bambi, those have been around for almost 100 years at this point. I'm just going to say this. I saw this film when it came out in 2013. This is actually the second time I've watched it, believe it or not. I've heard Let It Go in excess of 100 times, maybe hundreds of times. But seeing it in the context of the film, with the build-up to it and the visuals, for me, it absolutely still does it. Even though I know it word for word and beat for beat, this still absolutely smashes it home for me. It starts out as this heartbreaking ballad, and it turns into this glorious acceptance of someone seeing that the thing they've always been told is wrong with them is actually beautiful.
I cried in the cinema. It's so good. So I said that I heard this song, at least the start of this song, before the film came out, and devoid of the context, I didn't realise she was singing to herself. And that moment where she's just repeating the affirmations that her parents gave her, of like, you've got to conceal it, don't feel it. And then finally, like, she just realises, like, well, it's done now. I failed. Everyone knows, so I may as well just accept who I am. And it's so wonderful. What an absolute anthem of self-acceptance.
And I think this is why Elsa is so universally loved as a character. Okay, I say that, obviously, I'm certain there's people who don't like this character, both Disney fans and especially not Disney fans, but she's obviously a very popular character because there's so much you can map onto this. So, do you want to build a snowman? For me, I really read as sort of mental health and blocking people out from that, but for the rest of the film, I've always read the ice magic as around sexuality, but it can really be anything, but I think both of those stand out for me as the most obvious readings because it's something that you can't see but is such an important part of that person. And when you read, say, the ice magic has, say, non-heteronormative sexuality, where she's seen as a monster and she has to hide this and pretend it's not there, and her finally saying, this is a part of me and I'm okay with that and I want that to be me, is so empowering. And as you say, it's an anthem for people. And yeah, I said it earlier, Let It Go absolutely still does it. Regardless of how much I've heard it, in the context of the film, it's perfect.
That's a really interesting reading. I've always taken it as, you know, a reflection of her desire to play baseball to impress her parents. No, to me, there is no song like this in the Disney canon. This isn't an I Want song. It's not really even an I Am song. Because again, the I Am songs are very much, you know, it's your typical villain thing or a character song where it's just like, this is who I am. Hello, audience. Whereas this is very internalized and self-reflective. Weirdly enough, the self-acceptance anthem has become very popular in musicals since. You know, we have things like The Greatest Showman, which has the big show-stopping number of This Is Me, I think. And you can see it on Broadway that, like, as well as an I Want and an I Am song, we have like the big Let It Go number. And it's so bizarre to me that, although not necessarily inventing the song, Robert and Kristen Anderson Lopez certainly popularised it, and that alone, the effect on popular culture, is huge. I do want to say as well, special award goes out, it gets the Alliterative Mathematics Award for managing to shoehorn in the phrase frozen fractals, which I bloody love.
I'm always happy when the Disney film has the title of the Disney film in the film, especially when it's not a character.
The problem with the one-word titles is it shows up all the time. It's like in Tangled, they didn't stop saying Tangled.
It's harder in some films, like, you can't really say, look, it's the Rescuers, Down Under.
We'd be remiss not to mention, just like everyone else has, that this sequence might have the most maligned and ridiculed piece of animation, potentially ever, where Elsa brushes her hair forward and it just passes through her arm. So much so that when they repeated Let It Go in Kingdom Hearts 3, because by the way, in Kingdom Hearts 3, they just stop the game at one point and are like, here's Let It Go again. They actually fixed that bit of animation for it, like, and really draw attention to it, being like, look, it's fine now. Which, by the way, you've not seen Let It Go until you've seen Sora, Donald and Goofy off in the distance going, huh, is someone singing?
Now, I was eagle-eyed for this, and I swear there's not an animation goof, because I think it looks like her hair just rolls down her shoulder. Am I missing something?
It passes beneath her arm, because the hair, what they meant to happen is that she pulls the hair forward and then it flops over the shoulder as the ponytail the braid. I don't have hair, don't judge me. As she pulls the braid over her shoulder, the bottom of the braid pulls through and it flops down. But instead what they have is they have her pull it over and it's just instantly in front of her shoulder. And it's fine. Again, I feel so sorry for the animator who is responsible, because I genuinely feel this is the most ridiculed animation goof. And the thing is like, they happen all the time. It's just when it happens in a film that is seen about 20 times by, every toddler in the world, they're going to hit the age of 10 and go, this was weird, wasn't it?
No one's maligning the edits in The Black Cauldron where characters are just in different places between cuts. I mean, I am, constantly, but no one else is.
That's because no one else has seen The Black Cauldron.
Ah, yes. So Elsa is in her ice castle and she's accepted herself and removed herself from the rest of the world. Anna sets out, ill-equipped to deal with the frozen wasteland, and eventually stumbles across a trading outpost where she meets a weird Swedish guy, and she also meets a now adult Kristoff, the ice salesman / farmer, and his weird relationship with his dear Sven.
I like this sequence. One thing I really enjoy is it is not played as a meet cute. It does not have any of the tropes, which, as you said, it shows that whenever they're using the tropes, they're using it deliberately to subvert it. And when we actually have our romantic leads meet, it's not played as that at all. They just meet.
I think under any normal circumstances, we'd still read this as a meet cute. So I think the deliberate setup of Anna's found her true love, she's engaged to him, she wants to get back to him, means that as an audience, we're not really shipping her and Kristoff. I mean, we are because we're adults, but subconsciously we're not shipping these two characters together because, like, no, Anna's taken, Anna isn't interested in Kristoff, and Kristoff is really not showing any interest in Anna either.
So we have a little bit of a back and forth in Oaken's trading post and sauna. Kristoff eventually gets kicked out and settles in for the night in a nearby shed with his reindeer Sven. And my word, I cannot believe you would cast Golden Pipes himself, Jonathan Groff, and this be his only number. Don't get me wrong, reindeer are better than people is a beautiful little lullaby, and I love what Jonathan Groff is doing with him voicing Sven as well, which again is kind of Disney revival of like, talking animals, this is how it would happen, is people projecting. But like, people do that. If you've ever seen someone with their dog, they're like, who's a good boy? I'm a good boy. And it's like, what are you doing?
To be fair, they do make it up to him in Frozen 2 by giving him the best song in Frozen 2.
And at this point, Anna barges in, I'm going to say she barges in and throws him his carrots and the supplies and is like, you're going to take me to the North Mountain. And thus our characters are put together and are on a journey up the mountain. They have a bit of a back and forth on the sled. I don't really care for this sequence. Again, it's very revival of like criticising. Also, Kristoff has a line about eating boogers and I just hate it. I just don't want it in the film. I just don't think it's funny.
The bit that stands out for me in this sequence is they're kind of arguing and back and forthing and stuff, and then Kristoff's like, wait, stop. And he stops the sled, and he turns around and there's wolves. Now, if you think there's wolves following you, don't stop. It's the worst thing you can do. Which leads into a little bit of an action sequence. They jump over a ravine, the sled falls down and immediately bursts into flames, which is very Simpsons-esque. Kristoff, after a moment, decides that he's not going to abandon Anna and teams up with her, and they carry on going up to Elsa's castle.
Meanwhile, we're cutting back to Arendelle, where we've got Hans doing a very, very good job of leading as a kind and benevolent ruler. We've got the Duke of Weselton being like, stop giving free stuff out, you're ruining my life. And Anna's horse returns. They're like, oh no, she's lost on the mountain. We'll send out a search party. I know I've been put in charge, but I, the Hans, will also be part of the search party. I put random servant number 7 in charge.
I mean, presumably there was someone in charge as a regent for like the last 20 years or whatever.
Nope.
Oh, no, I suppose the monarch's only died fairly recently, so maybe not.
I'm pretty sure the portraits were in charge.
It's like Harry Potter, but there's no magic. They just go and say, what do you think we should do? No response. Yes, I agree, we should keep locking Elsa up.
We have... oh god, we got Olaf, Jesus. Back on the mountain, Anna and Kristoff bump into Olaf. He's fine. He sings a character song, which is weirdly very flat visually. I don't care for In Summer. I know it's a fantasy sequence, so they can kind of get away with it. But for me, it could have been done in 2D animation. Like, it's incredibly flat. And I just feel it's not engaging. Also, right, I know this is a completely objective podcast, and I don't like to let subjective opinions come into this, but I just don't care for Josh Gad. Maybe it was when he played a sex addict whose thing was that he rubbed up against women on the subway, but I just don't like him in things.
I mean, I've not seen the remake of Beauty and the Beast, but that's a weird direction to take LeFou in. So I mentioned having seen the sort of wacky comedy trailer for Frozen being my only preconception when I first saw this film, and that puts Olaf front and centre. And going into this, I thought, I'm going to hate this character. I'm not going to say I love Olaf. As you say, he's fine. I think some of the jokes work. I think he's on the cusp of being annoying, but I think he's just so stupid and throwaway that he gets by. He's clearly in there for kids, and there's some nice little sort of farce misunderstanding bits. You know, he's clearly very stupid because he keeps wanting to be in summer, obviously not knowing that he will just melt. I think the joke I really like that I'd forgotten about is he says, "Who's the weird looking donkey?" And Anna says, "That's Sven." And he goes, "Okay, and who's the reindeer?"
I'll give them that. That's a well-written joke. And also, maybe it's because he's part of one of the most successful films, but I also get the impression that he's one of the most popular comic relief side characters Disney have released. So clearly he appeals to someone. That someone is just not me, a man in his 30s.
I also feel obliged to address the meme you often see that says Olaf is 5'4". He's not. That's completely made up. But there's the screenshot of you Googling it and it's saying he's 5'4", which then implies all the other characters are 10 plus feet tall.
I will say I really like the visual design of Olaf. He's very cute. The idea of just the snowman with the big head, the little feet, it works quite well. And it's always just very believable, despite not liking Josh Gad. When I see the visuals and I hear the voice, that's Olaf. It's not Josh Gad. And yeah, after Olaf's little number, we're basically at the top of the mountain. There's a few bits here and there about, like, you know, climbing the mountain, whatnot, and what you're going to do when you get to the top. Oh, I'm going to talk to my sister. But then they're at the Ice Palace. They're completely, you know, taken aback by the beauty of this incredible structure. Anna goes up to talk to Elsa, and there's a nice little moment where she knocks on the door and it opens. And she comments on the fact that's a nice change.
This leads into a reprise of For the First Time in Forever, where Anna's saying for the first time in forever she can support Elsa and be with her. Elsa is shocked to see Anna, but she says, you know, you go back, you can be queen, you can be in the kingdom, and it'll all be fine. Anna points out that it won't be fine because everything's frozen. Film title. And Elsa just starts collapsing in on herself. And again, the ice power is very much linked to emotion, so she starts building up this ice storm, and she just loses it completely, lets out a huge blast of ice, striking Anna in the heart. And despite Anna's best efforts, Elsa just wants to be alone, wants to drive everyone out, creates a huge, big ice monster, which picks them up and throws them out.
And eventually tries to murder them.
Yeah.
I will say, she created Olaf. Olaf is sentient. I assume this marshmallow character, I think that's what they officially call him, is sentient as well, so she doesn't, you know, control him. But yeah, maybe don't make someone that's that aggressive when you're just trying to get someone to leave. Particularly it's your sister.
I suppose the idea is that the character's created in the mindset Elsa's in, so when she's happy and upbeat, she creates Olaf, and when she's upset, she creates Marshmallow.
What are the other states other than happiness and anxiety?
I've no idea, Liam. I've no idea. I also don't know what happiness is.
One thing I do really like about this sequence, though, is that the whole idea was Anna was going to go up and be like, look, you've accidentally put the world into... The world? Arendelle. Maybe it goes a bit further, we'll see. You've put our world into an eternal winter. Could you please fix it? And Elsa just turns around and is like, I don't know how. Please leave.
It's like when you go around to your neighbours because they're playing loud music and you say, can you turn the music down? And they say, I don't know how. Can you please leave? Anna starts getting colder and colder because she's been struck with the ice magic. Kristoff knows that he needs to take them to his family, aka the love experts, which is a weird combination of traits, to heal her.
Now, I don't know how I feel about this from a narrative perspective, the reveal that Kristoff was raised by the trolls, because it is played as a reveal, but as an audience we already know.
I feel there's a weird plot hole here, because little baby Kristoff and little baby Sven see the king and queen taking Anna and Elsa to the trolls, and he follows them because there's a trail of ice and he's obsessed with ice. That's a sort of vague character trait that Kristoff has. And he watches this whole exchange go down at the start where they wipe Anna's memory and warn Elsa about her powers. And I guess he just blocked all that out because he doesn't mention any of this to either of these characters and say, oh, your sister's Elsa. I remember her being told all these things by some trolls. I also insist that it'd be way better if there weren't any trolls and it was just a big load of rocks and it was just Kristoff going, so you're a bit of a fixer-upper, and just rolling rocks around.
Yeah, so I don't really care for the trolls. I understand their purpose in the film. I also understand the purpose of fixer-upper. I just wish they had done it all in a slightly different way, but, you know, it's all well and good for me to sit here from the comfort of my own room and say, well, that's no good, without proposing an alternative, but there's just something about the trolls that I don't like. Maybe it is because we see them at the start, but then what do you do at the start instead?
So, to draw a parallel with Moana, which sets up Te Fiti and Te Kā as sort of mythical beings who are at the start of the film and they're also at the end of the film. And in some ways they're the sort of the focal point and the drive that the character's moving towards. I think the reason they work and the trolls don't is because the trolls are also comic relief characters who are also central to the drama of the film, which feels really at odds. If it was these weird mythical characters that had this sort of ethereal otherworldliness to them, I think it would be a lot more appealing, but the fact they're sort of I mean, they look like they're from the film Trolls, right? They've got those sort of googly eyes and big goofy teeth. I think that's what the problem is with them.
Now you say it, I really do not like the visual design of the trolls. I don't mind them being small, I think that's fine, but they're cutesy and they're very smooth, whereas when I think of a rock troll, and, you know, you don't always have to play to type and whatnot, but when I think of a rock troll, I think of that giant golem in the Neverending Story, where it's made of rocks, not this is a rock that can become animate and move around and it grows arms. I don't like the visual design. I don't like the fact that they're too comic and that there's some weird, like, hive mind and they all blink together, which is terrifying.
There's a line in Fixer Upper, which is a song all about saying that Kristoff isn't perfect, but hey, we're going to force you into marrying him. And they say, the thing with the reindeer, that's a little outside of nature's laws. And I was like, do you know what the phrase outside of the laws of nature means? Because I don't think it means what you think it means.
I think they think he can read Sven's mind.
Wait, hang on. You think they think that he thinks he can read Sven's mind?
So when Kristoff is talking to Sven, they're like, that's amazing, you're reading his mind.
Ah, okay.
Because like every non-important character in this film, they also are idiots.
Okay, this is the main thing I want to talk about with the trolls. So, there's a theory that the trolls basically curse Hans during this sequence, and it's actually a magic spell. Now, normally I don't buy into these sorts of theories, partly because 80% of narrative film theories are it's all in one character's head. But not only do I like this theory, I like it more than the vanilla reading of the film. Because up to this point, everything we've seen of the character of Hans is what he says on the tin. He's kind and he's compassionate and he's exactly what he seems to be. An example is when he looks across at Anna after she walks away and he's been knocked into the sea, and he looks at her and smiles. Now, I suppose there's a case to say that he's smiling at her because he's going, yes, it will all be mine. But it seems genuinely quite affectionate.
That's a very different smile, though. And this is my problem with Hans, is that they were so obsessed with it being a twist that they have to completely hide his character from the audience, even though the audience sees him when other characters don't. Because all it would have taken is, you know, a slightly wry smile or a raised eyebrow during that moment, and everyone in the audience would have gone, he's the villain. Or something during Love is an Open Door, everyone would have gone, he's the villain. And they were more bothered about hiding their hand and having it be a cinematic reveal than they were about it being a consistent narrative.
You're absolutely right, and that's why I think the troll thing works so well, because everything prior to this point, Hans is one character. After this point, he is a different character. There's a point in this song where Kristoff points out that Anna's already engaged to someone else. The trolls conspire and basically say that, oh, that's not a big deal, we can sort that out, and that Kristoff and Anna are getting married. It all just scans really, really well. It fits together really well, and it makes sense that the trolls would do this. They've got this weird nebulous magic. They clearly kind of play with what they tell people versus what they do, which we've seen at the start with Anna and Elsa's parents. And honestly, yeah, when I watch the film, that is my interpretation of what is happening.
I've just realised as well that my desire for a rock troll basically happens in the sequel.
It does. And also, these trolls are barely in the sequel.
Good. I do have some positives. One thing I love about Fixer Upper is it's basically the point of the film that you do not need to change for people. And the only thing you can really do, rather than kind of demanding change from people, is show them love and they will show you their best side. And that's the film, basically. We'll get to it in the conclusion, but I really love how well it's kind of set up here. Like, that's what makes them love experts. They understand that love is a powerful force in connecting people, and that love isn't something you receive, it is something you give. And that's all set up in this song. And I didn't really appreciate it until watching it this time, because the first time I saw this film, I didn't like the trolls. Every time since, I've kind of just tuned out when watching this bit. So to sit back and go, oh, that's what the film's about, I never noticed. I felt a bit stupid.
I think one problem is it's quite a comedic song in terms of the sound design and lyrics. It's very different to the other songs we've had. And also, the front end of this film is so laden with main character songs that this one really sneaks under the radar. I think the last one we've had is In Summer, which is Olaf, but it's quite a short song.
And it's rubbish.
And it's fine. But again, this is something they address in the sequel where they go, oh yeah, having probably the weakest two songs in the film as the last two songs in the film, it isn't the best idea. I mean, how they've had Let It Go, which is arguably the best Disney song, and then they just put these in afterwards.
I've said it before, and I completely understand that it's really difficult to pace your film around songs, but they manage it in stage shows. Stage shows have a really good format, and yeah, it's generally built around 2 acts, and you have your big end of first act closer, which would be Let It Go, I suppose, in this. But then, as you say, if this is a stage musical, what the hell is in the second act? These 2 songs? And again, like, we're trying to judge it on its own merits. They definitely address this in the sequel. I think the sequel's song pacing is better, but it's a problem here. But it's a problem in basically every Disney musical.
To a degree, I think you look at something like Tangled or Aladdin, where the last song is I See the Light / A Whole New World, which are perfect end of Act 2 songs to set it up. Beauty and the Beast has the Mob song, which is a perfect Act 3 song of escalating the drama. I think there's good examples of it, but you're right, it's very hard to do. And often, as we've talked about, Disney musicals do not have more than 1 or 2 songs in the second half.
What you've stated there are more exceptions than the rule. And I would even say that I think the Mob song is the only third act song. I think Frozen 2 might have one. Moana has a reprise, but that's it. Like, it's hard to do narratively. To tie up your story in a film whilst also singing songs is really hard. But it's really noticeable in this film because really the first act is very almost sung through.
Yeah, the only one I can think of is When I See an Elephant Fly.
Oh, yeah. So we've got 2. We've got the Mob song and When I See an Elephant Fly, which covers the full range of human emotions right there.
One every 50 years. We'll get one in 2041. Okay, I'm done complaining about the trolls now, I promise.
The only note I have left of the trolls is that the number ends with Anna collapsing and Kristoff saying she's as cold as ice, which every time is going to just make me burst out into willing to sacrifice.
Which she is. Because that's the denouement of the film. That's the song that should have been the Act 3 film. Act 3 song. Okay, so Hans has reached Elsa's castle. He's got a bunch of soldiers, including a couple from the Duke of Wesselton. They have a showdown with the big ice monster Marshmallow. Wesselton's men break through and basically go to try and kill Elsa. She tries to get them to leave her alone, but they won't, so she kind of puts them in perilous situations to incapacitate them so they don't kill her. Seems reasonable. When Hans and the others get there, all they see is Elsa having these two men at her mercy, and even at that time, Hans says, "Don't be the monster they think you are." Whilst he's having this conversation, one of Wesselton's men tries to shoot Elsa with a crossbow. Now, Hans quickly looks up and then rushes towards the guy and deflects the crossbow upwards, causing a chandelier to fall on Elsa.
That's it. That's the only indication we've had that Hans maybe is working some machinations in the background, and it's an eye glance, and it's this late into the film.
And also, I don't think it makes a huge amount of sense, because it's the idea that he looks up there so the chandelier can drop on Elsa and kill her? Because I don't think he could bank on that just knocking her out, right? Like, I don't know. I don't think it makes any sense.
Sense or not, it does knock Elsa out, and then...
Ben, we're moving on with the plot, despite your objections.
And then we cut back to Arendelle, where Elsa is now imprisoned in her own dungeon. Hans appeals to her and says, "Look, you've got to stop the winter." She's like, "All I care about is my sister. Just make sure she's okay." And Hans is like, "She left looking for you. She hasn't came back. We need you to get a grip on this." Again, quite a reasonable character at this point still. But at this point, Anna shows up because they have raced back to Arendelle because the trolls told them that only an act of true love can thaw a frozen heart, which they interpret as a true love's kiss. So they're like, let's get her back to Hans. Hans can kiss her. Everything will be fine. They rush in. She's dying. Everyone sees that Anna. They set her up on the sofa. Hans goes to kiss her, and then, for some reason, just decides to reveal his plan instead. And this is the kind of the big twist reveal, and you can see it in Santino Fontana's performance. It's weird. I don't necessarily think it works. I think it becomes comically villainous at this point, and we discussed it with the trolls, but as is, I just find it strange. I think his plan doesn't make much sense. His whole shtick was that he is 13th in line to his throne. Obviously, he'd have to marry into the throne somewhere. He was originally planning on marrying Elsa, then he heard that she was cold. Hey. And then he met young, naive Anna instead and was like, I'll marry her, I'll off her sister, and then I'll be king. But, like, you can still do that without Anna dying. She seems nice. Why get rid of her?
My plan was to off Elsa, but when the opportunity came, I saved her life to bring her back and then kill her. I don't get it.
Well, it's all for appearances. Like, if he is a kind of sociopath playing four-dimensional chess, you know, bringing her back and having her executed for treason is better than, well, we just had to kill her on the mountain, I'm sorry. Because then people are like, we don't want you ruling our country.
Just take the Wesselton guy and say, this is the guy who did it, I'm going to kill this guy. Anyway, Ben, get over it. But, as I say, I think you go down the troll route and it suddenly makes more sense because he's kind of behaving weirdly at Elsa's castle and now he's just turned full evil, and it's not enough for him to be evil. He has to tell Anna he's evil because then she'll fall out of love with him so she can love Kristoff. It's a perfect curse. And we mentioned earlier that the trolls asked about curses, and curses are never mentioned anywhere else in this film. All I'm saying is they've got curses on the brain. He leaves Anna to die, basically puts out the fire and leaves her to freeze to death, but fortunately she's rescued by Olaf.
Maybe wait 5 minutes.
Nope. No, it's the James Bond thing.
Imagine a James Bond film where he's rescued by a snowman.
I thought you were going to say, imagine a James Bond film where he falls in love with someone and then they leave him. Actually, no, that basically does happen. Yours is funnier.
One thing I love about Olaf rescuing Anna is he sets a fire for her to warm her up, you know, melting himself effectively. It's a very nice trailer moment. They really loved it. And she says, you can't do this. When he asks about Hans, she says, Hans didn't love me. I'm not even sure I know what love is anymore. And Olaf says, well, that's easy. Love is putting someone else's needs before your own. Reflecting, like, that's what he's doing at the moment. He's basically sacrificing himself for Anna. And it's at this point that they realise that that's exactly what Kristoff has done. He has left Anna with what he thinks is her true love, putting aside his own feelings. And that's where they're like, Kristoff is my true love. We need to get to Kristoff.
So Hans tells the court that Anna has died, but they managed to say their marriage vows, and he's going to execute Elsa for the crime of killing her. But when they go to execute her, she's escaped onto the frozen fjord. Anna and Olaf give chase. Olaf is bumbling somewhere, and Anna's rushing out onto the ice. Kristoff is rushing out onto the ice because he realises he loves Anna and that he can save her with true love's kiss.
That's another thing. After dropping Anna off, Kristoff just leaves, and I get that they're going for, well, she's with her true love. I don't want to be here because that'll upset me. But, like, someone you care about is dying. Maybe, stick around to make sure they're okay and provide some emotional comfort.
I mean, to be fair, the servants are like, thanks for dropping her off, and start closing the door. Like, it's not like he's welcomed in.
It's just a habit. I'm so sorry.
One thing I noticed on this watch, which I think is a really nice touch, is as Anna goes out into the storm, unsure of her identity and where she's going to go, she now has a purple cloak on and her hair is white, mirroring Elsa going up the mountain at the start of the film, which is really nice. Again, creating the parallels between these two characters.
I thought you were going to say that as Anna goes out onto the ice, you notice that Olaf gets blown away because the film is done with him.
I didn't even notice that. I don't really notice him when he's in it, so I don't think about him when he's not in it. And then Hans confronts Elsa and basically pulls a scar on her and says, you're responsible for killing your family member. Elsa's devastated by this. The snowstorm kind of stops. Hans goes to execute Elsa. We can see the court looking on from a balcony. I think it's just there to address a potential plot hole later on. Anna, looking across the ice, sees Kristoff running towards her, but also sees Elsa in peril and runs in front of the blade, freezing solid just as the blade shatters against her, saving Elsa. I love this sequence. It's classic Disney, but my god, it's emotive.
If you'll forgive the quite grand statement, I think this might be the finest finale Disney have ever done. This act of self-sacrifice is so perfect, and it's so perfectly set up throughout the film, and again, it's all about subverting your expectations. Because what happens is, as Anna is frozen and Elsa is absolutely devastated, and I feel it every single time I see this. Like, my heart breaks a bit when Elsa is hugging Anna's frozen corpse. But it's at this point that we zoom in on her heart, and it beats, and a glow goes out, and she starts to thaw. And I felt so taken aback the first time when I saw this and was like, of course, only an act of true love can thaw a frozen heart, but it's not receiving an act of true love, it's performing an act of true love. The trolls said it, but because the film is constantly telling us, a kiss, we're just not expecting it, and then when it happens, it's so satisfying and so moving. I don't necessarily think you need Olaf saying, oh yeah, only an act of true love can thaw a frozen heart. But it's so beautiful that I will forgive that. And also, they're appealing to a very, very young audience here, so maybe you do need to say it.
But yeah, it's perfectly done, and I think the subversion genuinely works. Again, we're really setting up that, oh, actually, Kristoff is her true love, and he's the one who's going to save her, and we don't go in that direction at all. It's a perfect way to have the relationship between these two characters resolve, and it's beautiful. I love it.
And then, because we still have one more plot element to resolve, Elsa goes, oh yeah, love, and then just magically fixes Winter. It's maybe not as good as what's just happened, but
I feel you're selling it a little bit short, because I think it's meant to be Elsa's tried blocking out this part of herself, then she's tried accepting it but living in isolation. It's only when Anna shows she loves her unconditionally and for what she is that she finally feels accepted, not just by herself as she doesn't let it go, but by the most important person to her, and that's when she can finally melt the ice.
You know what? I feel stupid, but it never dawned on me that what she's doing is accepting herself because she's saying the word love. I thought she was using, the fact that I love my sister and I'm going to use that power to control the winter, whereas actually what she's saying is I need to just love and accept myself, which is a very different message. It's very much her arc, so I feel stupid for not realising that, but I do think the film could have done it a little bit better, considering it's coming off the back of, as I say, the perfect Disney finale, to just go like, oh yeah, love, winter. Not winter, summer. I love winter. I hope you all love winter. It's now winter forever.
Cold never bothered me. And then we head into our resolution. So with summer returning, the people accept and love Elsa for being the queen in person that she is. Hans is punched out by Anna and then sent home to be beaten by his 12 brothers. I don't know exactly what the implication is.
What crime exactly are his brothers going to charge him with? They're like, oh, you committed treason against a foreign country. You're just like, okay.
They're going to charge him with failure, Liam. Failure to take over the foreign country. Just on a side note, I've not talked about this with Hans, but for almost the entire film he wears gloves like Elsa. And again, there's a reading that Hans has some powers or something else going on under there. Again, I think the only time he removes his gloves is when he's being evil with Anna. Again, you could read into that, but they're never going to go back to the character of Hans because why would they?
I definitely fall more into the side that gloves are a visual metaphor for concealing something.
Yeah, that works better.
In this case, his evilness. Because if they were a metaphor for magic, he would have put the gloves on after the trolls cursed him.
Yeah, that's true. I'll give you that.
I do love as well. I say I love. I enjoy. No, I love it. I'll go with that. How, before punching him in the face, Anna says, "The only frozen heart around here is yours," which is very much he's not the monster, you are, but worse.
The Duke of Wesselton is unceremoniously escorted out, and there's a decree from Elsa that they'll no longer trade with them. Now, I've made a note that says, look, I know this guy's a dick, but don't cripple your economy over it. He's their biggest trade partner. Like, you're also spiting yourself in doing this. This is like North Korea saying, screw you, China.
Yeah, on her first day on the job, she's basically managed to declare war on 2 foreign nations.
We get some other nice little character moments. So Anna buys Kristoff a replacement sled, and they kiss, and they're together. Elsa makes Olaf a little snow cloud so he doesn't melt in the warmer weather but can still experience what it's like to be in summer. And the very last scene we get is Elsa creates an ice rink in the castle square for the people, and showing that she's proud and she's accepted herself and what her ice magic represents. So if you read that, and yeah, what I'm really happy with is we don't end on Anna and Kristoff kissing, we end on Anna and Elsa, because that is the drive of this film.
Specifically, the shot that I love about the ending is that the castle itself is kind of merged and enveloped in ice. Like, there are ice sort of structures around it and as part of it, which obviously visually very much represents that acceptance. Like, she hasn't isolated herself and made an ice castle for her. She's realizing there's a middle ground to acceptance where she doesn't have to be alone and accept herself, which is just lovely.
Then we get the pop single version of Let It Go over the credits, and a very brief post-credit sequence of Marshmallow the Ice Monster finding Elsa's crown and putting it on.
Of all of the pop covers, this is probably the one I hate the least. I actually don't mind it.
High praise indeed.
Because it's very much a different arrangement. It's not just Celine Dion singing slowly. Demi Lovato's version of Frozen, like, it has a completely different bridge. They were like, a pop song is very different to a Broadway show number, so we will write them as such. The one thing Robert and Kristen Anderson are really good at is writing a song that can be played in different ways and have different meanings, which we'll get to when we cover Pixar. I do wish the credits were a bit more engaging. It's very just black void with names, which is fine. But I really like what they did in Tangled and The Princess and the Frog and Wreck-It Ralph. And they even go back to it in the next few films. It's so strange to just be like black screen and credits.
When it should be black screen and characters doing karaoke over the end credits,
yes,
is what you're saying.
Or, you know, what they've been doing, which is the kind of storyboard art showing either the plot of the film or what happens to the characters after the film. I just think it's much nicer and much more engaging, because I always used to skip credits. And I know post-credit scenes are kind of a cheap way of getting you to sit through the credits and, you know, pay attention to the people who worked on this film. Like, they deserve your attention. But I think post-credits are a lazy way of doing that, whereas having, like, engaging credits that are also telling a story is a much nicer way.
And with those credits, that is Frozen. But before Liam and I pass our final judgment on whether it's worthy of truly being called an animated classic, Liam, is there anything else we need to talk about regarding Frozen?
There is just one thing. We have one more list we need to deal with, which is, of course, the sexiest characters. As always, we're referring to any character that we feel is unnecessarily or inappropriately sexualized for a family entertainment film. And there's a couple of options with this film, but I think when it comes to just raw sexual energy, there is only really one choice. So, Ben, who is the sexiest character in Frozen, and why is it Elsa and her swagger during Let It Go?
You're absolutely right. I think, obviously, these characters are meant to be young and attractive and done in this certain way, and obviously the actors playing them are also young and attractive. But yeah, I think we all know it's post-Ice Princess transformation Elsa, particularly the look down the camera when she's got her magic ice dress, her magic ice hair, her magic ice makeup, yeah, I don't think anyone's in any doubt that that's who it is. But I can see the case for Hans, Kristoff, or Anna, but yeah.
But not Sven.
No, not Sven. I mean, maybe if you really are into that sort of thing, the guy who runs the shop, because he's massive.
The thing with Elsa is it's the walk. That might be the hippiest walk that Disney have ever animated.
And in one film recently, we had Pamela Anderson.
With another character added to the list of sexiest characters, there's just one thing left to do, and that is to decide whether or not we believe Frozen does enough to earn a spot on the prestigious list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. But first, we must retrieve the scroll. High atop the North Mountain, we climb, reaching the ice palace built around our vault. We reach the vault and are intercepted and told there's nothing they can do. The list isn't there. We're going to have to go get it from the trolls who borrowed it. So naturally, we do the only logical thing and start a new list. So Ben, does Frozen make the brand new list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics?
I've praised this film a lot during this podcast, but I want to be clear that I don't think this is a perfect film. I think parts of it are trying to be a bit too clever for their own good. Obviously, I've talked at length about Hans. I think the trolls are a misstep in terms of how they're presented. Not necessarily in terms of their narrative purpose, but I think just the execution is off. Let's be clear though, visually this film is absolutely stunning. We praise Tangled for its use of light and dark, particularly the lantern sequence. I also had a lot of praise for the market dance sequence. But even in the couple of years since Tangled, the jump is incredible. The use of ice and snow and temperature with gloves and clothes, it's all feeding into this motif of what's inside and out. And really, if Frozen just did all those things well and was just icy Tangled, I'd probably say it makes the list. But the stuff it does around exploring non-romantic ideas of love and saying they are just as, if not more important, is so subversive for a Disney film. Hell, it's subversive for a mainstream Hollywood film. It resonates at such a deep level and says so much about why this film is so popular. Now, don't get me wrong, obviously it's popular with kids because it's shiny and it's got a funny snowman and it's got catchy songs. Like, kids aren't reading into that. But I think the reason it's so universal and the reason Elsa's so loved as a character is because of this. She doesn't have a romantic plot. She doesn't in the second one, which I think is a huge strength and means like they've not ruined this character. They acknowledge why Elsa works so well as a character. And for me, that message is so strong and so well executed, I will forgive any flaws of Frozen, and for me, it's an absolute yes.
When going into this film, I very much felt I'd had my time with it. I watched it a lot when it came out, and those cracks really became quite prominent. Again, I don't care for Olaf, I don't care for the trolls. I think the handling of Hans is very messy, and as you say, almost too clever for its own good. They care more about a twist than a good narrative. I also find we've got a really strange hero's journey in this, where neither Anna nor Elsa really fit that typical Disney want versus need, which isn't necessarily a problem. I don't think you have to follow the rules to make a good narrative. It's just that, you know, those rules, they'll give you the structure to help you write a good narrative. But what we have instead is not individual arcs, but a relationship arc where it is based around the love between two sisters. And it's so unique in that respect. And the way it does that is handled so brilliantly. And as I say, that finale, that love is not something you receive, it is something you give, is so good. So good, in fact, that they basically repeated it for Raya. And I liked it there too. That core of this film, that sibling relationship, is so perfect and so unique that I don't care about the rest of the film. I think that arc alone means this has to go on the list for me. So obviously it's an absolute yes. But if we can have a caveat that we're not including the trolls or Olaf, that would be wonderful as well.
And with that, Frozen makes the list. We put it in with our best curling icy cursive and add it on as the newest addition to the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. But those are just the opinions of Liam and myself. Frozen is a film that has touched a lot of people in a lot of different ways, but we always want to know what your thoughts on the film are. Is it one that holds up and stands up to those revisits, or as Liam says, are the cracks starting to show and maybe Frozen's time in the sun is causing it to melt slightly? Please let us know. We're always up for an interesting discussion in the comments section. Of course, Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics is available on SoundCloud, Spotify, a selection of other hosting platforms, and a special enhanced version on YouTube, where we also post memes, interviews, discussions, and edits of other animated films. And speaking of other animated films, there are always plenty more to discuss. So Liam, which film are we looking at next time?
I'm not sure how you can follow up such a perfect film about siblings torn apart by tragedy. So next time we'll be looking at a film about siblings torn apart by tragedy. We are of course looking at Disney's very own jaunt into the Marvel Universe that they acquired in the form of Big Hero 6. Personally, I think it's a very wise decision to let the princesses and the fantasy sit for some time, and I think it paid off. I think Frozen is a very hard act to follow, so the only way you can really go is completely out of left field. So I'm really excited to go back and revisit Big Hero 6. And with that, all that's left to say is thank you very much for listening. We really do appreciate it, and remember to join us next time for Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics.
Cold as ice, willing to sacrifice.